see. I might. There you go.
Folks, we thank you for coming back so promptly from the floor. Today's Thursday, April 24th. We are picking up H86, an act relating to establishing the chloride contamination reduction program for the Agency of Natural Resources. Other folks are describing this as the SALT bill. And Michael O'Grady is here to tell us all about it.
Good afternoon. This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. Up on the screen, you see draft number 5.3 with the April 23rd date and 354 timestamp, and that's the proposed amendment by House Environment. So before I get into the bill, how much do you want me to bore you with the context of this bill?
I feel like a paragraph of context is probably good.
Okay. The state is required to have water quality standards by the Federal Clean Water Act. They're required every 3 years to report on whether or not all the waters in the state meet those water quality standards. If the water doesn't meet a water quality standard, it has to be identified why, and the pollutant of concern has to be identified. Fluoride, salt, is a pollutant. It is polluting the waters of the state, and some of the state's waters are impaired and are not meeting the state's water quality standards. Consequently, when water is impaired, a TMDL has to be developed. Does everyone know what a TMDL is?
We do, because I think you've told us about it.
Yes, and so it's a plan to bring that water back into compliance with the state water quality standards. And they can be expensive and they can have significant regulatory requirements attached to them. This bill is intended to reduce chloride runoff into waters, to attempt to minimize chloride contamination so that the waters of the state do not become impaired for chloride. Some waters are already impaired. There is one TMDL that has already been prepared for water that's impaired by fluoride. There's 4 others that are impaired but don't have TMDLs. It's likely that if things don't change, then you're going to have other chloride TMDLs, and they would be most likely around the state, but most likely in the more developed areas of the state. So this bill has a purpose. Its first purpose is to establish accepted standards of care for the application of salt and salt alternatives in an effective manner that provides safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles, while also reducing the impacts of salt and salt alternatives on the quality of water. The intent of the act is to provide that persons compliance with the standards that are established in it shall limit the person's liability and negligence. So what does that mean? This bill creates a program. It directs ANR to come up with best management practices for the application of salt by commercial salt applicators. If those commercial salt applicators voluntarily complete the certification program or the training program, they are certified as a commercial salt applicator. Certified commercial salt applicators would be given a liability protection from negligent suits that are caused, where the cause of the negligent suit is the snow or ice as the hazard, and any hazard or any damage is caused by the applicator complying with the state standards that they learned under the certification program. So that's what this bill is. And you will see a definition section. You'll see a definition of apply salt or application of salt. That's pretty intuitive. I won't read that. But it also applies to summer dust control. It is not just about winter de-icing. In addition, it does not apply to transportation infrastructure construction projects, those projects where there might need to be salt application or de-icing or dust control And it may have to be done in a way to allow for the construction to go forward. Commercial salt applicator is someone who applies salt for compensation, but does not include municipal or state employees. Master commercial salt applicator, an individual who employs others and trains them under the standards. Salt is any kind of chloride that you can think of, used for de-icing, anti-icing, or dust control. Salt alternative is anything that doesn't contain chloride, but is used for de-icing, anti-icing, or dust control. Secretary is Secretary of A&R, and then there's the definition of what's definition of transportation infrastructure construction project. And then you get to the creation of the program. The Secretary of Natural Resources, after consultation with AOT. Why are they consulting with AOT? Because AOT already has what's called the TS4 program, which is its permit for water quality management. And under its general practices, it has salt application standards. They train people. As DG Craig DiGiamario told me the other day, they will actually follow people, new plow drivers, to make sure that they're applying the correct way. They have geofencing so that when the plows go into areas where there might be chloride issues, like in the one area where there's a TMDL, they have a geofence around the sunset.
That's just for AOT, though. It's
Right.
not for municipal.
AOT.
Okay.
AOT. Okay. So they will consult with AOT and other states. Other states are doing this: New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Colorado.
You're giving us a little more detail.
Right. Okay. They established the program. It's a voluntary education, training, and certification program. And they get trained in the effective and efficient application of salt and salt alternatives to maintain safety while also reducing the impacts to water quality. Part of the program, they adopt the standards, and those best management practices shall address certain aspects. They will come up with requirements for efficiency in application while maintaining safe conditions, standards for how to prevent salt alternatives from entering waters, including cost-effective and less harmful substances, whether and how to implement and calibrate equipment, when sand is appropriate, an alternative, especially in regard to water quality, record-keeping requirements, a model form for record keeping, certification requirements, testing requirements, and any other requirements Secretary deems necessary for the program. Then, once those are established, the program shall offer training. Again, it's voluntary. They offer training for commercial applicators and the implementation of the BMPs. Upon completion of the training, they are deemed or designated a certified commercial applicator. They have that designation for 2 years. There's a provision about how the master commercial salt applicators get certified. I'll skip over that. The commercial salt applicators submit an annual summary of total winter salt usage. Secretary establishes a method for estimating salt usage. And there's some provisions about how the program, kind of minor technical provisions. Then you come to the salt application limited liability. There's a presumption. Well, actually, let me step back. An A&R certified commercial salt applicator or the owner, occupant, or lessee of the real property that's served by a certified commercial salt applicator shall not be liable for damages arising from hazards on real property owned, occupied, maintained, or operated by that person when the hazards are caused solely by snow or ice, and any failure or delay in removing or mitigating the hazards is a result of the applicator implementing the BMPs that they were trained in. Moving on, that limitation on liability does not apply to gross negligence or to reckless disregard of the hazard. A certified commercial salt applicator needs to maintain, actually, before I get that, there's a rebuttable presumption that the commercial salt applicators are not creating water quality issues or need water quality permits when they are applying according to the best management practices, but that will not apply if there's a requirement of a TMDL or MS4 permit, municipal separate storm sewer system permit, because some of those permits will require, ultimately will require chloride application requirements, especially in those chloride impaired waters. And then in order to maintain the liability limitation, the protection, the salt applicator or the owner, occupant, or lessee of the land served by the applicator need to maintain records of the type and rate of application, the dates of treatment, and the weather conditions for each event requiring application. And they have to retain those records for 3 years, which is the statute of limitations for a tort claim. Then there's an education and outreach program. ANR does education and outreach to commercial salt applicators about the certification program, but also to the members of the public about the harm to water quality, pets, and wildlife from excessive application of salt and salt alternatives. There's Section 3. ANR is going to report to you, the General Assembly, on where salt is stored and whether or not it is covered. And whether or
That's
not,
enough details on,
you want to skip
I
over?
think a report on salt storage is, yes, we can skip.
All right.
Thank you.
Section 4 is the same level of limitation for municipal salt applicators when they complete a voluntary Vermont local roads curriculum that has the best management practices as part of it. They will have to do that training every year as opposed to the commercial applicators who have it for 2 years. So let's get to why you are here. And that is on page 11, section 5. To implement the program, ANR is going to solicit interest from third-party vendors for training and certifying commercial salt applicators. If there's insufficient interest, the secretary is going to submit to you a recommended fee to charge for certification of commercial applicators for the revenue for the program. How much is the program going to cost?
Well, before we get to that, so is the assumption there that the third-party vendors would set up their own fee, and that's why we wouldn't hear about it unless there was not a vendor?
So there's going to be a proposed $250,000 appropriation to set up the program, including to establish the certification training program. If this amount is sufficient to hire the contractor to do the certification, you might not need fees. You might not need fees to run the program.
That's not what it says on the second to last.
I think this is really about to start the program. But then they're going to come back with a recommended fee for it. So this is what the fee report in 26 is, what fee will be necessary. But they might not need it. They might not need it.
Okay, so there's the fee that is charged by state government, right, to the person being trained. There's also sometimes the fee that's charged like
Contract.
by a contractor,
Training.
right?
I think that's a
And
possibility.
it looks like it defaults to that with
Could.
legislative interference on that fee level. Is that how I'm reading it?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay, and so it's possible that vendors are going to be charging a fee and we would never hear back about that because this report would not be triggered.
That's correct.
I would like us to have a report regardless.
Okay. So just strike if there is insufficient interest, the secretary shall
Yeah.
submit to you a recommended fee to charge for certification.
Mhm. And if you want to add like whether that's provided by a vendor or not, that's for
May I ask,
attorney-filled jurisdiction. Yes.
Madam Chair, I read section fee in the fee report to assume that the vendors are going to absorb the cost of any training certification.
That's a possibility. I mean, I think that is, so
So,
There's different models around the state, the US and Canada. And so some states just pay for it. They pay for the contractor and then they pay for the certification. Some states, there's a fee. Some states, it's kind of a combination. So there's a lesser fee. So I think you have possibilities of how the training program will be funded.
The second to last sentence in the whole bill, though.
I know. It says it shall be,
That's
be,
not you, I'm telling, for Representative Kimball.
will be funded on an ongoing basis. But it doesn't say who charges those certification fees.
And when are they able to charge those fees in this?
Once the program is set up and they are starting to conduct
So
training.
they could charge those fees before we get this fee report.
They're not going to be able to set up the program by then.
But like legally, could they if they hustled?
Legally, I'm sorry, what?
If they hustled really fast, could they legally in the way this bill is laid out?
Let's look at 8.
so you're saying the vendor could actually set up the program and charge the applicators the fee,
And that happens in,
real life?
like, the Department of Liquor and Lotteries. One of their training programs is done by a private vendor who charges a fee that I don't think
The state doesn't pay for it.
we.
But the applicant pays the fee
Mhm.
to the vendor, to the training organization. And we require him to have the certificate, so he has to pay the
So-
fee.
Whoever's being trained, yeah.
They need the best management practices to do the certification. They have a deadline of July 1, 2026 to adopt them by rule. They've been very clear that they are going to need a year to adopt those BMPs, especially by rule. So you're going to get the fee report. January 15th, 2026.
And the other one was December 2026?
No, it was July.
July 2026.
So they won't have the program set up, but if they're gonna need a fee, they're gonna be coming to you with that fee report 6 months before the rule is due.
Can you also make it clear that we would then set the fee after they recommend a fee? Thank you. Mhm.
And putting Slater in. But they,
We would do that when we set the fee. Sure.
could we even say it has to be in this? Because then it can't be argued over.
I think we can, I mean, I think we would do that once we set the fee next year. Because they wouldn't recommend it in the inflator. Maybe we can. I feel like you never finished the bill. There was like one more little section.
Well, we haven't gone over the appropriations. I don't know if you want that. There's one classified position that would be dedicated to the program, $150,000 appropriated for that position. An intent statement that the appropriation be made annually for that purpose. And then $250,000 for the purpose of contracting an external organization to establish a certification training program.
What is up to?
Pardon?
Up to $250,000.
Right, so they're gonna bid it out. And they can bid out up to $250,000 for that.
That seems like a funny way to frame that, but that is an
Usually it's
appropriations
no-
problem.
No more than, no greater than,
Would you want to amend it?
Sorry?
I'm thinking out loud, sorry, and not finishing sentences. Anyone have any other questions about this bill?
I do.
Yes.
You tell us to vote on a committee?
It was 7-4?
And I think we have a new thing that happens on our website where the,
Committee report is labeled with the vote.
yes. I think that's a new innovation this year. No? We've been doing that for a while? Really? Huh, I just noticed this year. Fun. Yes, Representative Pigley.
I know we skipped over that section, but it's section 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Higley. I wouldn't have skipped over it if I'd known you were interested.
Storage facilities. That's a big concern for me. I think this appears to be similar to the PCB testing program that we did.
Oh, gosh.
In the sense of.
Wait, add a red flag.
The cart before the horse. So I mean, if we're looking at, the estimated number of facilities that are not covered. And more than 100 yards from the surface water or drinking water sources, blah, blah, blah. Heard reports, and was there consideration for as much as a minimum of $70,000 per municipality for buildings that are not covered?
So in the Senate, there's a different version of this bill, S-29. And that has a mandate to cover salt storage. This does not have a mandate for coverage. This is just to find out the scope of the issue, find out where salt storage is, state and municipal, find out how many are within 100 yards of water, how many are not within 100 yards of water, and then to estimate how much it would cost to cover or move facilities, including a proposed annual amount of funding that would be required to meet the timelines for cover or management.
Was there a figure though, Michael, that they had come up with a basic figure for facility? Or-
There was discussions about that, but that I don't think there was a final number. Maybe James knows of a final number.
I also heard that figure floated, represented, but I think it just varies so much from site to site and based on what's already on site that I don't think a final number would sort of generalizable.
Will you identify yourself for the record?
James Duffy, joint.
Thank you.
Which is part of what the conversation devolved into. It's literally some of the members showing pictures of their salt piles and or sand piles and like, how am I supposed to cover this? This is going to cost more than $70,000. And so there were discussions of that.
So the car before the horse, okay? That's my opinion.
But this is not a mandate. This is not a mandate.
I know this place, Michael, good enough to know it's tough.
Okay, not a mandate to cover, figuring out what it would look like to cover, and you're seeing the future. Okay. Heard. Representative Brannigan.
About that issue that Representative Higley just brought up. Michael, didn't we have money available a few years ago to build salt sheds? Is it gone? Are you?
I'm not going to try to date myself or anyone else. But there previously was a US EPA requirement that municipalities cover salt storage. That was pretty strict, and it consequently created a lot of criticism and disagreement from municipalities around the state. So it was rolled back significantly around the country. And so it was rolled back, and it's now really just limitations for MS4 communities.
MS4, but I know my community of Georgia got money, and that's how they built their salt shed.
So there is money available through the state, and well, I don't know if it's available under the feds anymore. It's cost effective to cover your salt because salt is getting more expensive, and rain can reduce your storage. Precipitation can reduce your storage, so it makes sense to cover. And in addition, there's something called the multi-sector general permit, which is a stormwater permit that if you trigger, you have to control the flow of runoff off of the facility of certain types. So if you're at your salt storage is at your public works facility, and that triggers multi-sector general permit, you have to control the runoff from your salt pile. And so that may have triggered coverage requirements in certain municipalities as well.
Okay. All right. So that's not having anything to do with these changes.
No,
Okay,
Yeah.
to follow up and go further on that from what Representative Brannigan was talking about. It also says salt and sand mixtures, okay? So most of my towns do not use salt on the road. They use a salt and sand mixture, and it's not that much salt. It's to keep the pile from freezing up so they can access it. So again, my understanding is these facilities, to cover those piles, would have to be for the salt and sand mixtures as well.
don't know that yet.
Yeah, okay.
Don't know that yet.
Any further questions about the bill? Yes.
I'd like to go back to the fee part. I'm the $250,000. I presume is to hire a vendor to produce the educational materials
Or to run the program.
or to run the program. So they themselves
Yeah,
would run the
there's
educational
language,
program.
there's language earlier in the bill that says the A&R can implement the program through state staff or through a third-party vendor.
Okay, but then as these people take the training, they pay a fee to take the training?
Yes, and they could either pay the state if the state is running it or
The vendor
the vendor.
outside.
And you're requesting that you get that fee report regardless. And that the General Assembly has to approve it regardless.
Okay, so the fee to the student is not mentioned here. I mean, it's not, it's implied that there may be one at some point, but it's not described here.
Well, that last sentence, that the program will be funded on an ongoing basis by certification fees charged to commercial.
Okay.
That's my concern, Representative Feltes, that it's sort of like implied and there, and I wanted a little more.
Because I presume there's probably in the fiscal note, there's going to be concern on how many municipal employees and how many commercial employees out there are going to be paying this to a fee to get the education.
We are going to move to the fiscal note in just a moment. Okay.
So on the AOT aspect of it, there is already a Vermont Local Roads program. It is voluntary already. It's not that they are incorporating the best management practices into that program. So AOT doesn't get an appropriation under this program.
Oh, yeah.
Is existing statute silent on the application of fault right now? Is this all new? I mean, it's all underlined, yes, but
There are no standards for commercial applicators for application of salt under state statute. Some agreements that you enter into for snow and ice removal between you and your landlord might have requirements. How often you plow, how often you apply, etc. But there is nothing else.
Representative Meslin.
Yeah. Well, I was trying not to be last, Madam Chair.
You're welcome to be last if you want to be. It's that you're always like, you were for a little while, always like 45 seconds after the closing bell.
Okay, well, anyway, Representative Higley is correct that almost all municipalities use a salt and sand mix. Much of it's traditionally been stored outside. More and more communities are having some sort of fabric covering that contains most of the, I mean, it's affected by the weather, but it's less and less affected by the weather than it used to be. Just FYI, I don't know who built it. B-Trans or somebody built a huge facility, building fabric and metal in East Deptford to store salt that came in off the train. But the result was terrible. The residences of Copper Pipes were so close to it, they were running out. And they took it down. So I don't know where the salt's gone, someone else, somewhere else, but I mean, which is to say it's an ongoing problem in a lot of places. It's just different jurisdictions in terms of who's in charge and different results. We keep this in mind, that's all.
Thanks. Yes.
I know a municipality that was looking at building a new salt shed. And of course, since COVID and everything, the cost has gone tremendously skyward.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. If you wanna hang out for a minute, we might want to amend that appropriations language as well,
Okay.
Michael, to just make it a little clearer. You want to join us? Thank you. We have the reporter of the bill here if we do have questions for her, but it is, let's do the fiscal note first.
Record, James Duffy, Joint Fiscal Office. So Legislative Council just provided an overview of, I'll get the operative parts of the bill. The fiscal note provides additional bill summary, nothing beyond what Legislative Council presented already. And then details kind of two buckets of fiscal impact from this bill. The first are the appropriations made to ANR, the costs of a full-time staff member to administer and run this program within the agency. So that's the appropriation for $150,000 to ANR from the general fund in fiscal year 26. This would be expected to be a recurring cost in future years. It's the intent in this bill that this will be an annually recurring cost for a full-time permanent classified position within the agency. And the second appropriation would be the one that's been discussed, up to $250,000 for the agency to contract with a third-party vendor to establish this training and certification program and perhaps also administer it on an ongoing basis. Just as a bit of additional context, in the state of New Hampshire, which has probably the most advanced version of this sort of certification program in the country, their program is largely, I think, entirely supported by registration and certification fees that are paid to the agency by those who choose to become certified. So it's a self-sustaining revenue.
I mean, the entire state of New Hampshire is sustained through fees by you. I appreciate you providing that context for that one.
So, and that's the kind of intent language in this bill. There is an appropriation made possible to ANR up to 250 to get this contracting support. But then it's also, contemplated in the bill that this would be supported on an ongoing basis through certain.
So we usually appropriate an exact amount and then a contract could be issued or not issued. And then money gets reverted if the contract is smaller.
That would be the more common approach. Yes.
Okay. Trying to decide if we should save appropriations 5 minutes and amend the language now for them. Yes.
I'm just curious. So Michael had mentioned that there's an option to contract, but they could just per the legislative language, could just do it with agency staff. So was that why it was up to 250 to give them the option to contract?
So the bill does provide ANR flexibility in how they administer this program. It gives them the option to administer it fully with agency staff, a third-party vendor, or some combination thereof. I can't speak to the policy intent behind give the flexibility given here, but I would imagine it's to give ANR flexibility as to how much they choose to rely on third-party support for setting this program up.
That just could be why it's up to as opposed to an exact.
So the contract is up to, but the appropriation is an exact amount because the exact amount goes into the budget. And so they might not spend the full appropriation,
Right.
and that makes sense, but they would get the full appropriation.
Right.
Up to the remainder gets reverted in the budget adjustment for the next year. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that is certainly an amendment the committee could consider on the appropriation front. And that kind of segues us into the fee component of the bill, which is that, ANR has this requirement in the bill to solicit interest from third-party vendors to see if anybody would be interested in administering this program in New Hampshire. I believe the main administrator of these training and certification programs is the University of New Hampshire. They have a technology transfer center that provides training and assistance and professional development to municipal roads departments, private contractors who work in transportation related areas. So this would allow or require ANR to solicit interest And if there were insufficient interest from vendors, they would be required to submit the fee report that Legislative Council already reviewed to ANR as to what it would require for the agency charge to administer the program fully in-house if there were no interested third-party vendors.
So, but is your read of the bill that a fee is going to be charged regardless? It's just whether it's charged by the private contractor or charged by the state?
The final section of the bill would suggest that the legislative intent is that the program be sustained through permit fees or application fees.
I think I misunderstood something. Whenever I saw from vendors, I thought it would be from the salt vendors themselves, not third-party education vendors or training
Oh,
vendors.
that's so interesting.
It's vendor in this context refers to, yes, let's say, just for totally hypothetical example, being the vendor to provide the training sessions.
Okay,
And, administering the tests to applicators and all that.
it's not, but that's the fox in the hen house type of thing.
No.
Yeah.
Any questions for James? Any idioms anyone wants to throw out? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would folks like to hear from the reporter of the bill?
Yes.
Great. I did not give her any warning whatsoever on this, so please be gentle.
Means I don't have my notes, but
Yes.
Ella Chapin, member of the Environment Committee. And I can just give you a very quick, why.
Yeah, the why and just intent, and then any details we will defer to Legislative Council and join this bill. Okay.
I'm happy to answer any questions. So this bill was presented to us by the Agency of Natural Resources as a way to address something that we know is happening. We know from the science that chloride from salt is getting into our waterways and is contaminating all kinds of surface waters in the state, as well as groundwater, I believe. But focused on surface water, we know that that's happening and that it's primarily happening because of the way salt has been used over the last about 50 years. 50 so years ago, we really didn't use salt. We used
Oil.
oil, and, more for the dust piece. And in the winter, many of us who grew up here, you used to never see ice. You never saw salt. You just saw sand. And that's drastically changed in how we manage our roads in Vermont and across the whole northern sphere, frankly, around the globe. So ice has become wildly popular because it is really great with ice and it really makes a difference for public safety. So that, has drastically changed over decades how we have managed our roads. And we have a lot of roads in Vermont, lots and lots and lots of roads, as you well know. So, but at the same time, we've watched over the last few decades chloride contamination in our waterways, and we are rapidly starting to exceed levels of chloride in our streams and lakes that are changing habitat and making habitat not healthy for aquatic organisms in particular. And chloride contamination, at its greatest amount can start to affect humans as well, but you start by seeing at lower levels of chloride contamination, the habitat being degraded. And so we have water quality protections in our state, both the state water quality laws as well as federal water quality laws, and we're watching chloride become a problem. We have one TMDL. Are you guys familiar with TMDLs? We have one waterway in Vermont that already has a TMDL for chloride. We have 3 more going through the process at ANR right now. So in a year, we'll have at least 4 waterways that have TMDLs where we will have to make changes to the way we use salt in order to address that chloride contamination. So this is a bill being introduced by the administration to our committee that we worked on and made some changes to address that issue of chloride pollution, and in an effort to work on it in a voluntary way, not in a regulatory top-down, you must do this, but in a way that balances the liability and the public safety needs with the environmental contamination issues. So what our state has been doing for years within the Agency of Transportation, and what we see like neighboring states that have been, like New Hampshire that's done this for a decade, is that there are ways to use best management practices in application of salt to appropriately balance so that we're not losing any public safety issues, but we're protecting public safety adequately, but using the right amount of salt to do that. And that's very specific, whether you're working on a sidewalk that's 20 degrees, or whether you're working on a highway that's 35 degrees, or whether you're working on a road or a driveway that's -10 degrees. And in some of those situations, salt isn't even, or a certain kind of salt isn't even the right tool. So there is a lot of detail in the body of knowledge now around how you apply salt after 50 years of doing it that are some good best management practices out there. New Hampshire's been using them for 10 years, running a very similar program to what you're looking at in statute that or in this bill, sorry. And then other states are working on this sort of at a similar timescale to Vermont. And so really, our committee saw this as, this is a preventive way to get at this by creating best management practices based on best management practices already being used by AOT and neighboring states, and then making it possible for salt applicators and landowners that are hiring those salt applicators to have limited liability if they're using those best management practices and getting trained annually on those best management practices. And so it enables people to say, I can follow these best management practices, but I'm not risking more liability for me or my organization in using the best management practices and somewhat limiting the salt application. That's sort of the bottom line of the bill. There were some tweaks that we made related to liability after the Judiciary Committee looked at it. And we made some tweaks originally in the bill, looked at some more in-depth engagement around the salt sheds in particular. We backed off of some potential programming related to how salt is covered and went with just like trying to understand with a study what we have in the state in terms of how that salt is managed in salt sheds and around the state, and sand, which also can have runoff into waterways and cause other kinds of issues not related to chloride. So
That was amazing for, preparation, I noticed.
great. I do have to report it in the next episode. Hopefully, actually. Anyway, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Well, Representative Kimball, I know you'd like to know, but Representative Kimball had a very, I thought, intriguing read of the statute. And I wondered, did you consider having a tax or fee put on the sellers of the salt so that they, on that end, pay for it's almost like extended producer responsibility. They've got to. Well, could you do something where you're taxing it at the sale, it's not excise? But in other words, the person selling the product is responsible for paying for its correct use, because that way,
I think a more light comparison would be the pesticide registration program.
There you go.
Where in order to sell pesticide in the state, you have to register. You have to pay a fee that you give them a special fund. Part of that fund is used to collect the waste pesticides.
And if we were to do that with this, we wouldn't have to come up with the money for the FTE or the program.
So if and when we set a fee next year, when they come back to us with fee recommendations, we can talk about who the fee should be levied against.
Is that too late? I'm sorry, I just asked.
Remember, the program can't go into effect until the BMPs won't be done until July of 2026.
Yeah.
You're gonna get the fee report back in January of 26, so you will have opportunity to.
So if we were going to get a fee report, couldn't we ask them to look at this idea as part of that?
That's up to you.
Let's hold your thought, and we have more questions for the reporter of the bill. Representative Canfield, sorry.
Being that you are in the witness chair, I'm gonna stay focused, Carol.
Oh, God, Val.
So you talked about AOT, you talked about town highways, you mentioned sidewalks, and you lightly mentioned driveways. Did you talk about the impact this would have on the private businesses, vendors who make their living plowing parking lots and lawn driveways?
We did. Yes, I think that because it's a fully voluntary program, as long as we don't end up with TMDLs all over the state, this is a fully voluntary program as we'd be setting it up and in order to not ever have to get to a required program. And as long as it's voluntary, any of the training or any kinds of changes in equipment is a choice by the practitioner at an exchange. If they make that investment to do the training, and in some cases, they may want some different equipment in order to meet the best management practices, that they would be seeing both a reduced liability and a reduced cost of salt, which is quite expensive. So there's sort of pros and cons for anyone considering the voluntary certification. And what we heard from applicators is that the few that we heard from here in Vermont were very interested and open to this and thought it could be beneficial. And what we heard from New Hampshire is that there's something like 2,600 certified providers in New Hampshire that have taken advantage of the voluntary program over the last 10 years, and that it saves them money on salt. They feel better about the liability. It has been really useful for their business.
So tell me about the folks that choose not to volunteer. What's the liability on them?
No change from it. The liability is exactly what it has been for their entire time that they've been running
On the
it.
property owner.
It's always been on, my understanding is, I'm not from the judiciary, but I was last biennium, so I have this much expertise in judiciary. My understanding is that there is no change in liability from now to what would occur for folks who are not participating in this program, whether it's the landowner or the salt applicator, both of whom have some liability currently. And that liability doesn't change unless they do become certified. If the salt applicator that a private landowner hires is certified, then both the landowner and the applicator have some liability protection. Some, not all, but some additional liability protection. So for those who don't choose to participate, the landowner chooses not to hire someone who's certified, and the person isn't certified who's applying the salt. There is no change in liability from what has always been the case for them in the past. Is that clear?
No.
Yes.
No, you said less liability.
There is only less liability if people choose to join the program. And both the landowner who's hiring the salt applicator and the salt applicator would enjoy some limited liability if that applicator is certified.
Can you describe the less liability?
I need I'm sorry, I need a.
Okay,
no,
That's a better
We
question
can
for
ask,
Michael.
Michael that.
Just to be clear, if people don't utilize a salt applicator who's certified, or or the applicator isn't certified, there is no change in liability for them. This does not affect them at all if they don't participate in the program. They're not increasing in liability. There's just no change in liability for them as to how they've always operated their operation.
Thanks.
Is it a question for the reporter of the bill?
It's a,
Because I'd like to have Michael answer.
you know, it has very much to do with what we're talking about. It's just information from the towns and the effectiveness of using salt and sand mix, that's all.
Okay, can you hold it and then we will
Okay.
switch chairs because no one has anything left for Representative
I have
Chapin. You do? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So you said one waterway has a TMDL for this and 3 more in the process. What are those? Do you know? Do you remember?
I can't, but
It doesn't, all right, that almost doesn't matter. What I'm most interested in is if it's a small pond or a small lake, I would think it would be the salt application, too much salt in the water would register much earlier than in a huge lake. So I'm concerned about like Memphis, Magog, and or even, not reading high enough, and yet the salt is hurting them. So do you have any sense what they are?
Even when he gets back, he could.
I think you're asking if smaller waterways are at more risk than larger waterways for a TMDL?
Yes, they are.
So far, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And we do have lots of great data that we were presented on Lake Champlain, which has been long, very well studied. So it's not that we don't have good information. We have great information. We are seeing chloride pollution in all of our almost all of our waterways. And large and small lakes, but it is my impression, but you do have some expertise in the room if you want to make this for sure, but it is my impression that those smaller waterways are more quickly going to get TMDLs because of that.
And folks, I want to keep us focused on the fact that we need to set up a process to set a fee in the future. That's our task here. Any further questions for the report of Bill? Yes.
So when it talks about these facilities being 100 yards from surface water or drinking water, what's the definition of surface water?
Ooh,
Would you like Michael to answer
I
that?
think Michael should answer.
That's fine,
Great
maybe
question.
Michael can help me out. But
It seems like such a simple question.
No, no,
I
no.
should be able to
Well, it's an
answer it, but-
important question because
Yeah.
again, whether it's a swale that has
Yeah.
water in it,
Exactly.
3 months out of the year, or if it's, anyway, it's important.
Agreed. Sorry, I can't.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Michael, would you like to come back? Or will you come back whether you want to or not? Let us start with Representative Odie's question. Yes,
Which was,
I was, Representative Odie, can you ask your question?
Can you imagine a construct where the salt seller would be obligated to carry the expense of their product?
Oh, I think you asked that question and he answered it all right. I thought you had a new one, but maybe it was Representative Canfield. You had a question for?
I was
Michael?
asking about the liability.
Ah, thank you.
For that.
Okay.
so the act provides that a certified commercial salt applicator shall not be liable for damages arising from hazards on real property owned, occupied, maintained, or operated when that hazards are caused solely by snow or ice and any failure or delay is because of implementation of the BMPs. That's basically negligence. That's immunizing or giving them limited liability from a negligence claim. The current commercial salt applicator that isn't certified is subject to negligence. So do you see the difference? Current applicator not certified can be sued for negligence. Certified applicator who goes through the program cannot be sued for negligence if the hazard is or the damages are caused solely by snow or ice. And the failure or delay in implementation or removal of that was because of the BMPs. So they have a limitation on liability, which the current applicator does not.
This isn't our purview, but how often is someone held liable for negligible application of those materials?
I don't know how often, but it does happen and I'm just the most recent anecdote I heard was New Hampshire, when they were testifying on how their program has been implemented. Someone slipped and fell in a parking lot, harmed themselves, brought a claim. The applicator had all the records that they had been there, that they were complying with the BMPs, and they received the liability protection.
So they're not liable for the pollution of the waterways.
Well, that's partly in here too,
Yes.
right? And so there's a presumption that you will not be required to get a discharge permit under 10 VSA 1263, which is a regular discharge permit, or 10 VSA 1264, which is a stormwater permit, if you are applying according to the BMPs.
Okay, well, thank you.
I had no idea I could hold someone liable if I fell in a parking lot.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that can voice. Welcome to America. Should really be organizing my life better. Representative Higley, you had a question about what water is, I think?
The definition of surface water.
Sure. I'm just going to read it to you.
My cousin Vinny. All at work?
It's all rivers, streams, creeks, brooks, reservoirs, ponds, lakes, springs, and all bodies that are contained within, flow through, or border upon the.
Thank you.
And the 4 bodies of water are, one's gotta be like.
So I think. Hold on, it's hard for me to tell you exactly. I'm looking at the 303D list, which is the list of impaired waters. But the waters, but they do impairments by segments of water, so it's like the mouth up to Road Mile 5. And so when you look at this Potash Brook,
Right.
Anglesby Brook, Monroe Brook, Bartlett Brook. There's one that's paired for 2 things. Muddy Brook, Centennial Brook, Morehouse Brook. These are the ones that don't have a TMDL yet. So as Representative Chapin noted, there's Sunnyside, they already have a TMDL. So those waters.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Michael? Michael, I'd love you to make those 2 amendments. I wondered what your timeline would look like for that.
I have 20 minutes until my next meeting. I can go do it now.
Do you think you could finish it and be back by 2:50? Because we need to wrap at 3. I'm just saying, like, we could wait until tomorrow.
Teleport me like in Star Trek.
It could, the report could include the, analysis of the idea that I brought up.
Yes, why don't you, okay, what we're gonna do is we are going to, you're gonna work with Michael to get that sentence in there.
Which sentence?
You guys, you 2 can go figure it out amongst yourselves. You don't have to figure it out right now. And anyone have anything else for Michael? Okay. I'm gonna excuse you, Carol. Thank you very much, Michael. Farewell. We were gonna pick it up tomorrow, so don't feel like you need to finish it by 2.
Comment?
Yes, I think Representative Higley also had a pertinent comment. No.
Yes, comments.
It was gonna be kind of a smart alecky comment, so I'm not gonna.
Okay. Representative Brannigan, did you also? Representative Maslin, comment, and then I think Representative Brannigan has something.
Yeah, the extra advantage of having
Let's
salt
play today.
in mix that our Representative Higley may know about is that before we started mixing salt with our sand, if there was a high wind on a really icy road, the sand would just blow away.
Mhm.
With salt in it, it actually sticks to the road much better. We use less salt and less sand. I mean, basically, it melts a little bit so that the salt application is far more effective.
Interesting.
Which is a public safety thing as well as monetary, and we notice it makes big difference, so.
Thanks. Representative Brannigan.
Madam Chair, I was simply motioning to Representative Canfield if we could have a secret squirrel meeting across the hall.
Cool. We're gonna actually we're gonna wrap for the day. We're gonna pick this, because everyone's a little,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, I don't want us to all sit back together anymore on this, but. That's a whole, we're gonna wrap for the day, and then tomorrow we are gonna pick this bill back up. I would love for everyone to have their ducks facing whatever direction they want for that in order for us to vote.
First thing tomorrow.
We're right after the floor. I'm not sure yet. Depending on Michael's schedule. So,